Hi, I'm Drew Garson, Director of Strategic Engagement for the Association of Washington Business, and I'm joined by Dave Mastin. He's our Vice President of Government Affairs here at AWB. Dave, welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about the legislative process and the role advocacy plays within your chamber. But before we start, Dave, could you talk a little bit about your background? I know you've been a former legislator.
I was a long time ago. So I served in the legislature from 1993 to 2004, so 12 years. I'm from the Walla Walla area, and the district was Franklin County, Walla Walla County, Columbia, Garfield, Asotin County, so the southeast corner of the state of Washington. I served 3 years as a Democrat, and I switched parties and was a Republican. I have the dubious honor of being the last Republican majority leader in the state house that we've had, so that tells you it's been a while, right?
Sure.
So I did that for 12 years. I was then I was a water law attorney, did some environmental negotiations. I got into contract lobbying. I ended up worked at OSPI, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the statewide office. I was the Executive Director of Government Affairs there. Came over to AWB a year ago. Gary Chandler, who had this role, was the Vice President. He and I served together, worked together a lot, and so he asked me to come over, and now I am the Vice President and leading our GA effort.
Great. Obviously, you've got the experience to be able to talk about this topic, Legislature 101. So before we start, can you talk a little bit about the Association of Washington Business, the organization that we both work for?
Yeah, so the association, we're the statewide chamber, the statewide manufacturing association. I want to talk a little bit about our mission, our vision. Our mission is we're the catalytic leader and unifying voice for economic prosperity throughout Washington state, right? All of Washington state, economic prosperity is what our focus is. So that's our mission. Our vision is that Washington will excel as a globally competitive state, built on a solid foundation of innovation, a world-class workforce, and a quality of life second to none. These are our driving vision, right? This is our mission, our vision. These are the things that drive the association. I'd also like to just add kind of our membership. And you look at this thing, you see that 65% of our members have under 10 employees. Almost 80% have under 25 employees. Now we have some very large and well-known employers as well. But this just gives you a flavor of the Association of Washington Business. We have a lot of smaller businesses that are the bulk of our association. Then I want to just turn over to the employer sectors. A lot of associations are one sector associations, right? So they represent one sector of the economy. We, of course, are all sectors. And so you can see the breakdown here with our service and professional groups, construction, manufacturing, and so on. That's AWB. And so that's what we're bringing to the table when we talk to the legislators.
Great. So that brings us to the crux of our presentation today, Legislative Process 101. I know for a lot of people it can be kind of intimidating or mysterious how the whole process works. Can you walk us through the legislative process?
Yeah, and I've actually started doing this kind of a presentation about 10 years ago, and actually did it back home in Walla Walla. And it's just to try to get folks to get a little different understanding than what maybe they hear in the paper or what they kind of got in their government classes, right, that they took, history classes, what have you. So start out with a real basic thing. Where do legislative bills come from? Why do legislators write bills? Now in the legislature, it's like a hammer. To a hammer, all problems are a nail, right? To legislators, all problems require bills. And so that's where you see, that's where it comes from. There are kind of two kinds of bills. There's the fix-it bill. And the fix-it bill is someone has a problem and this bill is going to fix that problem. Where do those come from? A lot of times they come from a constituent who comes to the legislator and says, hey, the speed limit on this road is 45 and there's lots of people here, it really should be 25. And so will you change that? And so you fix that problem. It can also come from a group. It could come from a group of teachers, from doctors, it could come from nurses, it could come from businesses, labor, all these different groups that can come to a legislator and say, hey, we've got a problem with the way this law works, let's fix it. And then the last I have here is legislators, right? And there are legislators who use that anecdotal, things that they experience that they don't like, so then they run bills, right? So those are the three kinds of things that you see on a fix-it bill, fixing a small problem. The other kind of bill is a policy shift bill. So it's a bill that is going in a new direction. It's changing the direction of what's happening in society and changing what government's doing. So that's a little bit bigger one, and you see legislators usually are the ones that have a philosophy that they have, what they think, how they think things should work. Groups also do that, so they're bringing ideas and policies to legislators to say, hey, here's a bill to do. And then finally, the party and your caucus, right? Each chamber, the House and the Senate, both have, the House has Democrat, Republican caucus, so does the Senate. So your caucus may have a position that they're trying to push through. A couple years ago, we had long-term care was a bill that was being pushed. It just got into trouble this last year, as we know, but it was one that is one that was being pushed by a party, by the caucus, and by some groups. When you see a bill that's introduced, so now we know why they introduce bills. When you see a bill that's introduced, will it pass? How can you tell if it passes? Does it have legs, as they say in the legislature? This one's not going anywhere, or this one has legs. And so how can you tell without doing too much work? How can you have an idea? And it's actually pretty obvious a lot of times. You can kind of look at some things. People who work in the legislative arena, the first thing they always ask about a bill, they don't ask what the subject matter is. They ask, who's the sponsor? That's a big key, right? So if it's a freshman, a first-year legislator, particularly in the majority party, or if it's an influential or moderate legislator, those bills tend to have more of a chance to make it through the process. The leadership in the caucuses always want their first-year members to get bills passed so they can go home and talk about being effective and here's what I'm working on. So that actually is a high priority. So when you see a first-year legislator with a bill, you go, oh, that one actually might get to go. That's the first step. Second step is the co-sponsors. Who are they? Is it bipartisan? Is it geographically diverse? Does it have rural, suburban, and urban members on the co-sponsor list? Is it politically diverse? You have very conservative to very liberal to all those in between. Do you have a mix of those? All of those things, if you have all these lined up, you're starting to look like, okay, this bill has a pretty good chance to be moving. And then again, the substance of the bill, right? And with that, you look at that, you go, okay, is it a technical fix? Is it a small change? Is it a local thing that's just for a certain area where no one else is impacted? Is it a retread of a bill that's been moving in the past, even if it's a big policy then, but it's been worked for years and it's moving? Those are the things that you look at and you go, okay, if it's one of those, it's got a better chance to pass. So those are the things that you can tell before the bill has even started through the process. It starts to give you an indication of what the likelihood is. And finally, the cost of the bill. Bills that cost money have to go through appropriations in the House, Ways and Means in the Senate. And so there's another step in the process that makes the question whether it'll make it through. So if the bill has money attached to it, that brings it back. If it doesn't, it's more likely. So this is when the bill's introduced. Now when it's introduced, it goes to a committee. So all bills have to go to different committees. They go committee of subject matter based, right? And then how do you know if a bill gets a hearing or it's voted out of committee? So a bill's getting a hearing, it's getting voted out of committee. So the question you can ask is why? Why is that happening? You have some bills that it's not happening to, but other bills it is. So why is it that a bill gets a hearing? Why is it that it gets voted out of committee? Here's the number one reason. It's one that most people don't think about actually. It's to keep someone happy. So think about that. Most of us are thinking, oh, it's going to pass because it's a good bill. It makes sense. It's good policy. That's not really it. You have hearings on bills. You might move a bill out of committee, and it's to keep someone happy. And who is it that we're keeping happy? The sponsor. The sponsor's been pushing on the chair of the committee, hey, I want to hear this, I want to hear this, I want to hear this. The committee chair might go, okay, we're going to hear it. Keep them happy. The other one, minority party. You have the minority and the majority party. You want the minority party to work with you through the process, so you hear some of their bills, you move some of their bills. The other chamber, right? If you're in the Senate, the House. You want to keep them happy when they have House bills in your chamber. So yeah, I'm going to have hearings. I want them to run our bills, so we're going to run their bills. And then finally, interest groups. So keeping someone happy is why you will see throughout the process, lots of bills will be moving throughout the process. Not getting to the end, but at least moving through the process. Now let's go policy and politics. The chair of the committee, or sometimes leadership, but the chair of the committee, this is an issue that they're interested in. They want to get more input from people and hear about the policy, want to get better sense of the politics, where people are. The only way you can do that with a bill is if you have a hearing, right? Or any hearing, and if you're going to put it up for a vote, that allows groups that are interested to start talking to legislators about it. So that's another reason why you might have a hearing and get a vote out, is because the chair is interested in that. The bigger one is the chair or leadership want to push a philosophical view. So why does a certain bill get a hearing? Oh, it's moving the state in a new direction, in a different direction. So that's one where, yeah, you're going to have to do that. You have to have a hearing, you have to have a vote, and we'll see how far this goes. Doesn't mean the bill's passing. It just means, yeah, we're trying to push an agenda, basically. And finally, and this is the one that most people think is what is normal, is the bill will or might become a law. So these ones up here, these are ones that, no, the bill's not becoming a law. And most of the folks already know it's not becoming a law. But this is what we're doing. This one is like, oh yeah, well, if a bill is becoming a law, it does have a process, and it's the hearing and the committee votes. So when you look at a bill that gets a hearing, that doesn't mean it's moving. That means it could mean a lot of things, right? And so that's part of the process, just to understand that some bills move, but they're not going all the way, and then a few clearly do get through the full process. So here's where we talk about that. Many are called and few are chosen. So think about legislation and how much legislation goes on. In the last 2 years, our state has a biennium, right? We have a 2-year budget, so it's a 2-year process. Each session starts January, right? Goes for a couple months. During that last one, we had 2,835 bills were introduced. About half are in the House, about half from the Senate. How many actually made it all the way through the process? 649. That's 23%. One of those bills got vetoed, right? So that's 648. And then 17 had partial vetoes. In our state, the governor can do a partial veto and veto sections of a bill, not just the whole bill. So we have 17 partial vetoes. And so as you look at that and you think about all the bills that are introduced and passed, the thing that really comes to mind is 77% of all the bills that are introduced die. They do not make it through the process. So folks that feel like the legislature is doing a lot of bills and pushing a lot of bills, quite honestly, compared to actually the ones that are introduced, it's a pretty low percentage that actually makes it through the entire process. One bill that has to make it through the entire process is the operating budget. And so the operating budget is one that's adopted every 2 years. Then the second year of the biennium, there's a supplemental budget, but this is one where that's the one that does have to pass. So it's always in the 23%. So our conclusion here is that there's only one way to pass a bill, and there's a lot of ways to kill one. And so this is in the legislative arena. This is how inside there's a lot of working and thinking about, okay, well, there's a lot of ways to kill a bill. There's only one way to pass it. So what is the thinking that most people who work in the legislative arena use? It's called the rule of 50, 25, and 1. And what that is the floor votes needed to pass a bill. In the House, it's 50. And right now we have a 57 to 41 Democrat majority, which means if you were trying to get a bill passed, you'd have to have 50. If you were trying to kill a bill, you would have to have 8 of the Democrats joining all the Republicans to kill a bill that you were trying to kill. So a good example, just recently, last year we had a bill on ergonomics, and it passed with 50 votes. Right? There were 50 Democrats who voted for it, and there were, instead of 8, there were 7 Democrats who voted no, and the Republicans all voted no. Just skimmed by out of the House. It died in the Senate, skimmed by in the House, right? But that's an example right there of where that difference and what the numbers are for 50 in the House. And so then in the Senate, you have 25. In the Senate, there's 25 in the Senate to pass a bill. The majority right now is 28 to 21. In that 21, we do have one Democrat who caucuses with the Republicans, has for quite some time. And so there are actually 29 Democrats, but 28 that actually work with their caucus. So you need a voting block of 4. And then, of course, you have the governor. Now, this is how it works on the floor. In the committees, it's not 50 and 25, but it's similar math. And so I'll just show you 2. One is Ways and Means, which is the Budget Committee in the Senate. They have 14 Democrats and 10 Republicans. Now, if 2 of those Democrats say no on a bill, well, then it can't pass because you need over 50 to pass. In local government, there's 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So if one of the Democrats say, no, I'm not going for the bill, that's how a bill dies. To make it pass, you have to have everything lined up. Everything needs lined up all the way through the process. To kill bills, there's different ways to do that along the way.
So Dave, you did a really good job of explaining how the whole process works. So how do we, as chambers or businesses, influence the process?
Good question, and that's kind of the next step, right? Because here's kind of how the process, when you look at bills. Okay, so now let's go to what happens to a bill that makes it all the way through. Getting your voice heard, when are good times. So if you just look at this, you can see, we introduce a bill, it's introduced, it gets a hearing, it gets a committee vote. It goes to the Rules Committee, which has 2 votes. It goes to the floor calendar. It makes it from the floor calendar to actually get a vote. Now it goes to the other chamber, has a hearing, committee vote, rules, floor calendar, get a floor vote. If they change the language at all from the House, you have to go to a conference agreement. So they have to get the language to be the same. Then both sides have to vote on it again. You can see how, throughout this process, how often something could go wrong and the bill doesn't move, right? And then it gets to the governor, and the governor, as I mentioned earlier, he can do a partial, or he or she can do a partial or a full veto, and then also do interpretive statements, which is a little bit more in the weeds. But again, this is how the process works. When's a good time? When's a good time to have influence? Right here at the hearing. That's a good time. Before the floor vote, so the rule or floor calendar. So it gets to the floor calendar, and that's a good time to be talking because there's going to be amendments for the floor. Amendments are put on the bill at committee and in the floor, so before that, right? And then if you miss those, you're over here at this chamber doing the same thing. So those are good times that you can bring in a bill or bring in influence, and then let's go to the best time. When is the best time to influence? And that is actually before the bill's introduced. And so that's kind of the interesting part of this, is to influence legislators. This is the part during the process that you do it. But actually the real power is if you can do it before the bill's even introduced.
Okay, so that's great. So let's talk about the hearing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so going into a hearing that's where the public has an opportunity to talk in front of a committee that it has the legislators, and they listen to public input at that point. So let's do this rule of thumb for testifying. So here's a couple things that people don't always realize. Number one, when a legislator's in committee, the first thing that they want to know is what they want to hear your position. So if you start talking about all this different stuff and you haven't said where you are on something, they can't hear it because they want to know, are you for it or against it? Are you for it or against it? They want to categorize folks that way. So that's a key point, is part of what you're looking for is to get your position there. Once they know your position, they will listen to maybe a 2 or 3 sentence explanation. And that's very contrary to what people typically think when they're going to come testify. But really, legislators, it's 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentences, and that's about it. So if you're testifying, your first goal is to have the legislators know what your position is. Your second goal is to get a follow-up meeting. Let me explain that a little bit, because when I'm talking before the legislature in committee, I'm not explaining everything. I'm just doing enough that they are interested that I can then say, hey, and let's talk some more later, and be able to sit down and work at the details of some of the language. And so that's the purpose. First goal is to get your position out. Second goal is to try to create an environment where you get a follow-up discussion. Keep this in mind. The longer you talk, the less they will listen. The longer you talk, the less they will listen. The more you say, the less they will remember. This is not about quantity. This is really about get to the main point quickly and move and be done. And it's after the meeting, after the hearing, that you have more opportunities.
So I think what would be really interesting is for you to be able to walk through an example of testimony. What does it look like? What should you include? What should you not include? Can you go through that for us?
I can do that. And I started this with when I worked at the Superintendent of Public Instruction, because we'd have all kinds of people coming up and testifying. And they were all, very interested in the policy, and they wanted to explain everything to legislators. And we actually got a script that we said, okay, here's how we're going to do it. It needs to be really short and to the point, right? So here's kind of a template to committee testimony with follow-up. Madam Chair, members of the committee. So you acknowledge the chair of the committee and then the members. My name is Dave Mastin. I am here on behalf of the Association of Washington Business. I signed in pro, or other or con, I'm going to use pro for this, pro, on House Bill, Senate Bill 5419. My reason is that this bill provides a B&O tax break for our employers. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And that's it. And that's a really good example for someone who is here short time and able to come up and testify. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Dave Mastin. I'm here on behalf of the Association of Washington Business. I've signed in pro on Senate Bill 5419. My reason is because it provides a B&O tax break for employers that we could use at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions. That's all the legislators want to hear. And they hear that, and then they know, oh, I'm going to talk to that person afterwards. Would they like this amendment or that amendment? If I said I was con, I didn't like this bill because it does this, this, and the other thing, well, then they'd be going, well, what kind of amendment would fix that? And give me another chance. I guess bottom line is testifying in front of the committee is not the end. It's just the intro to, hey, let's talk some more.
So previously in one of the slides you talked about the best time to influence the process is before
Yes.
the bill is introduced. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, and thank you, because this just goes into what's when you have a bill right in front of you. To be honest, it is better to have a relationship with a legislator that then the bill comes in after the fact, because you have that relationship and then the bill's something you talk about, rather than you walking in with a bill and that's what creates the relationship is this bill, right? And so that difference is where before the bill's introduced. So let's take a look at that. As I've described this in the past, I kind of broke it up into two. This is a little simplistic, but there's two different ways to influence legislators. There's the transactional influencers, people who influence by transaction. Those are the folks that are campaign contributions. That has that. Representing a voting bloc, so you're coming in as a voting bloc that they care about, that's important to them, re-election and so forth. Someone that can create negativity for them, right? That they want to, okay, I'm going to listen to this person, I want to hear what they have to say, because if I don't, it's going to cause problems, whether it's public or private, but just cause trouble. So those are kind of the transactional influencers. That's not the part that we wanted. That's something that, yeah, it's possible, but really what we're looking for is a relational influencer. So you really want to have that kind of relationship with your legislator. How does that work? Typically, they'll have a relationship with someone who is like-minded on other issues, right? So if I know you and like, yeah, I get the sense that on a lot of issues we kind of see eye to eye, and you come in with something that I don't know about, I already got a good sense with you, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna hear that out. Or something I don't agree with. Well, now I'm more likely to listen to someone who I know traditionally, historically has kind of been on my side, or we agree on things. The second one is the expert on an issue. So I have a friend who's a physical therapist. If he comes to me to talk about physical therapy bills, I'm going to listen to him for that purpose, right? Because it's like, well, he's an expert, so he knows about this area. Someone who's in the school system is going to be able to talk about what it's like to be in the schools and education policy. So expertise is a big, and that's about, I value you as an expert, and this is the thing we're talking about. That's the biggest one. If the legislator likes you, they're going to talk to you. It's kind of like all of this, right? And that's, I think, my next slide. Yeah, how to be a relational influencers. They're like everyone. Legislators are just like everybody else. They will listen if you show that you care about them as a person. If you can show that you understand, or at the very least appreciate the challenges that they have. Whether you understand it or not, maybe not, but you can appreciate the long hours that they put in on the floor and the long hours they do serving the community. And so just expressing that appreciation. Listening to them. A lot of people go to legislators and what they want to do is spend all their time talking. What they should be doing is listening to the legislator to hear, well, where are they? What do they think about these things? And that's really an important piece of developing that relationship. This is one that I put in there because respect the role. Some people like badmouth legislators when they're talking to legislators, right? And it's like, yeah, I don't think that's a smart move. At the same time, so you respect the role, even if you don't like some of the actions that some of the people in those roles have, but you don't genuflect. There's the Catholic in me. You don't genuflect to them, right? They're not royalty, they're not like that. So it's just, yeah, but have a good respect for them. And the real key is to relate to them above and beyond politics. It's something beyond and above politics. I have someone from my hometown, a guy named Bart Nelson. If he called me, I'm like, oh yeah. And I'm not thinking about the policy he's calling me on. I'm thinking about how I grew up hunting pheasant on his land with my dad, right? So now it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, Mr. Nelson, what is it? And then he, right? So it has something to do outside of the issue is what gets me interested in talking to him. So how do we do that? All right, that's the key. We ask them questions and we listen. Ask your legislator questions and listen. Learn first and then talk issues. Ideally in separate meetings. So most people when they think about legislators, oh, the reason I talk to them is I want to talk to them about an issue. No. The reason you want to talk to them is you want to get to know them. You want to understand where they're coming from. And once you have that, then you start talking issues. So what do? You learn about their schooling, their work, their children, their spouse, their interests. That develops that relationship. You get a better sense of who they are. And if you want to ask a political question, don't ask it about an issue. Here are two really easy political questions that every legislator wants to answer. Okay, here it is. Number one, what was the best surprise you had being a legislator, about being a legislator? What was the thing that you didn't expect that happened that was like, okay, right? And then you flip it, what was the worst thing? right? So every legislator, whether they've been there for 6 months or they've been there for 20 years, can answer those questions. And they have nothing to do with are they liberal, conservative, all that stuff. None of that. It's just their own experience. And legislators like to talk about themselves. They like that opportunity, right? And so those are really good political questions to ask.
So Dave, if you're a chamber, what's a good strategy that you should employ for your advocacy efforts?
Yeah, good question. So outreach plan, right? So right here, create one for a chamber and for some selected members. And 2 key things: make it simple. This is not brain surgery, right? Make it very simple so people can do it, and then repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And so those are kind of the overview. For a chamber, a couple things, and I got most of this from chambers already, right? Like looking at chambers, talking to them, what do you do? And so I just compiled a list of what some of the stuff, some chambers do all of it, some do some of it, but these are some of the lists that I put together from chambers. So profile legislators in your newsletter, which means you got to interview them, right? You got to interview them, their background, where they went to school, all those kinds of things, and they will appreciate that. They'll appreciate that they've got that. A quarterly sit down. Just the executive director with the legislator. Hey, I just like to sit down, see how things are going, talk. And then the thing that's hard for legislators to say no to is a business tour. So I've got a business here, I want you to tour it. I've got this, I want you to tour. They will typically say yes to one of those. During session, conduct a weekly or bi-monthly conference call. This can either be one to find out from them what legislation's going on, right? Just checking in and hearing what's going on and have them be able to express, here's the things that are happening. Might be sharing with them stuff that's happening in the community. But again, just a brief half an hour, right? Once every 2 weeks, once a week or once every 2 weeks. Definitely request a session preview and a session wrap up, right? So get those on the calendar. Typically legislators like to get their work done before December 15th. From December 15th until session, they would prefer not to be, that's kind of family time. So if you can get it before December 15th, that's pretty good. Then after session, just within a month after session, that they'll be able to come and give you a wrap up. And then just search for ways to get them to speak to your group. Not to just come as an invited guest, but actually to speak, whether to your group, to attend ribbon cuttings, to receive awards. Those are the kinds of things, if you get 1 or 2 a year, that starts to develop, that relationship does develop. Send birthday cards. Yeah, that's one that you get hundreds, if not thousands of birthday cards, probably hundreds of birthday cards when you're a legislator. And it sounds trite because everyone knows why people are sending it to you, but it actually, it's kind of cool, right? So you actually like it. So I put that on there just for that. Okay, chambers, now you have business owners, right? So the past slide was for like execs and staff, what they can do. Well, now you also have certain business owners that can probably help you as well. And so what you have to do is identify 2 or 3 business owners who have a good chance to connect with the legislator. So that's what you're kind of looking for. It's like, is there one that goes to their church? Is it one that goes to the gym where they work out? Is it somebody who's in their book club? Is it somebody who's in, you start to look to talk to your membership about, hey, do you have any relationship with this legislator outside of being a legislator? And those are good people to kind of connect with the legislator. And what do? They say, hey, Dave, in 3 months, can we go to lunch? Legislator schedules for this month, book crazy. For 3 months, probably open. So if you put it out far enough, they can probably make that work, right? And so then what you want to do is create, once every 3 or 4 months, let's go to lunch, let's go to dinner. And when we go to lunch, I'm going to talk about what I'm doing, you talk about what you're doing. Not this bill or that bill, but just, hey, what's going on? Check in during session. So during the legislative session, check in, email, phone call, however you want to do that. And it's not about an issue, it's just to say about something that's happening at home, right? Something that they may not have caught in the paper. Hey, don't know if you saw this. This was in my hometown Union Bulletin, right? Tri-City Herald, something like that. But just to check in. And it's not about an issue. So it really is more about, hey, just letting you know, and legislators appreciate that. And it's like, okay, this person knows I'm a human being. I'm something more than just a vote, right? And then this is the part where, now it becomes important. And we do this with our chamber alerts, right, that we send out, action alerts that we send out to all of our AWB members and also to our chamber members, part of the Grassroots Alliance. And this is where we identify and relay business issues, right? So specific things that we have that we are saying, hey, this is a position you need to be on. So when a legislator get a call or an email from someone, and only sparsely, right? This is not like every issue over and over again. It's like, it's on the big stuff. Hey, this is something that I really care about. Wanted to let you know how, hope you can support it or hope you can oppose it. That's what I'd like. And you do that sparsely and only after you've developed that personal relationship where there's a connection there before you get into the issues. Now, that doesn't mean you can't just do it right up front, right? You can do it. What I'm describing here is the best way to be effective. The most effective folks dealing with legislators are ones that have a relationship with them that is beyond the issue of the day.
So Dave, that was outstanding. Thanks. As we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to leave the viewers with? Yeah, and so kind of above this, more at a 30,000 feet level, one thing that I gained as a legislator than as doing lobbying work, just when I talk to people at home or when I talk to people who aren't as engaged in politics, what I try to share with them is that even if you don't know what's going on and you hear stuff in Congress or here or whatever, I want folks to understand that everything that happens in the legislature, there is a logic and it does follow a rationale. If you understand kind of the backstory behind it, you will see, oh, okay, this makes sense. Now that's different. Saying that it makes sense and understanding how this happened is different than saying I agree with it, right? That's a totally different thing. But you can see, oh, it's not some crazy thing, right? It's not some corrupt thing. It's like, oh, okay, this does make sense. We have examples of that every year in the legislature where if you don't know the backstory, it's like, well, what's going on here? And then you go, oh, okay, now I'm starting to understand why it is this is happening. Not that you agree with it, but at least you can understand why it's happening. So that's one thing I do. The second thing, and over the years listening to people talk on the talking heads and that people, legislators talk and members of Congress and so on, is I really caution people, be very careful when one party explains the actions of the other party. You see that a lot where here's what they're doing and here's why. I would just really be cautious on that. If a party or legislators explain why they're doing something, okay, but when they start saying what the other side's doing and why, I'd be pretty cautious. Now, I was a Democrat. I was a Democrat for 3 years, and I was in their caucus, and then I was a Republican for 9 years. I was in their caucus, and I would go into the Republican caucus, and I'd hear people talking about what Democrats were thinking, what they were doing, and I'm going, no, they're not. I was just there. That's not how they think. And then also I talk to my Democrat friends and they'd tell me what the Republicans are thinking and I'm going, no, they don't. That's not how that works. So just a word of caution there. I guess the one constant fact is that neither party understands the other party all that well, the motivation and what how that all works. And so that's just like a caution that folks get kind of fired up on both sides. It's like, yeah, there's always a little more to the story. Great. Well, Dave, I want to thank you for participating today. I think the more people can understand the process and how it works and demystify it, I think it becomes easier to participate in the advocacy efforts. And I think it makes it more clear for businesses what their role is also. Yeah, in the Association of Washington Business, right, we work really hard with legislators and we work hard to, hey, here's what's happening for businesses, the impact that this bill has or that bill. That is all incredibly important. But I can tell you, just quite honestly, the impact that a local chamber can have and that local businesses can have on an individual legislator, there is nothing that can match that. There's nothing statewide that matches that. And so the more that we can get our chambers and some of our employers to go, hey, I'm going to engage in this. And it's not full time. I'm going to just do a little bit here, a little bit there, make it simple, repeat, repeat, repeat. Those are the kinds of things that really make a difference, and that's partly why, that's why we're doing the Grassroots Alliance, right? That's why we're pushing this so hard and working with our local chambers to make a difference in Olympia when the policymakers are voting on bills. Absolutely, and hopefully this presentation has made a difference for our chambers and for our businesses. And if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at dru@awb.org, drew@awb.org, or you can call me at 360-943-1600. Thanks and have a great day.